So it's super interesting for me to think about like how that group has come together. And obviously, you mentioned Corbin Carroll, like a potential superstar. My 10-year-old son is already curious whether or not he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Conversation with you for another day. But it is interesting to think about the draft class that he came in with, right? 2019, when Corbin Carroll was your first round pick. You guys had 7 picks that year between the first and second rounds. So like massive opportunity to change the future direction of the Diamondbacks. And it made me think, based on your prior experience when you were Red Sox, in every position imaginable, from farm director, starting in the fall of 2005, straight through when you were GM in 2016. You obviously had the experience of some draft picks, some draft classes with the Red Sox where you had an opportunity to do damage, right? Like you had the 2011 draft class, which had 4 first-round picks, ended up being the draft class that produced Jackie Bradley Jr. and Matt Barnes, a guy named Mookie Betts in the 5th round that year. How much did that experience of the possibility of having a major number of high-round picks inform how you guys approached 2019 when you had all of those top picks that ended up including Carroll?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did in what we try to do was we knew the foundation for the future impact of a good major league team was going to have to come from this draft. And we've taken a lot of college players over the years and a lot of good ones. But I think we were a little more aggressive going after some high school guys, and in that year and in subsequent years. And we've hit on some of that upside, and some of that upside's turned into a lot of impact players. And and where we are in the food chain from a market standpoint, getting superstar players isn't as easy. The vehicle through free agency is probably a little tougher for us. Not that we can't play, and we have been, but it's a little tougher. And we need to find that impact a lot of ways in trades and in the draft. And I think when I look back on the group of players, not just with the Red Sox, but also with us from the 19, 20, 21 draft, was that group of those top picks became the foundation of the team that we had last year, where we had a bunch of 23 and 24-year-olds in our lineup during the playoffs and ultimately into the World Series. And that's something that when we were doing that, it didn't all come from the 19 draft, obviously, but we were trying to aggregate a young core of players. I think something that we saw more with the maybe the '07 class in Boston and beyond World Series team, and how strong those teams were moving forward and how together they were, and they built relationships together. And we wanted to try to recreate that.
How do you do that? How do you how do you let culture be like, is it tricky to think that the culture can be built from the youth up? Or, did you to what degree were you like, okay, I have to supplement with the right elements of veteran leadership? And to what degree did you want to avoid kind of surrounding with too much veteran leadership so that young players like Corbin Carroll could be leaders of the group that they came up with?
Yeah, it's a fine line. I don't know the exact answer to that. I do think having a young group together that comes up through the minor leagues, that play together through the minor leagues, I think there's a natural bond when those players get to the big leagues together. We did see it in Boston. We've seen it here. They're close. They're friends on and off the field. I think they root for each other even when they're competing with each other, I think that's one of the trickier dynamics, is that sometimes guys play the same position and they're competing for playing time, and they're competing, somebody might get optioned, but they're friends and they root for each other. And I think that goes a long way in 162 games. But one of the things we saw through the middle of last year was that need. We had a good group of young players. They played hard. They played fast. We were pretty dynamic. I do think we were missing a little bit of that veteran presence. Like when Longo was here, we got Tommy Pham, we brought in Paul Sewell. Like those guys that we brought in from the outside, I do think helped bring that group together in a lot of ways, because sometimes we lost for 2 or 3 years pretty aggressively here. And I think unwinding the losing is hard for young players. I think you get indoctrinated into the losing cycles, and, this is what our fate's going to be. And we had to change that a little bit. And I think some of that comes with players progressing, and you win a few games, the chicken or the egg thing. But I think also some of it's bringing in some veterans that have won. And You lose a couple games in a row, everyone's just like, all right, it's all right. We've lost a couple games in a row. Who cares? It has no bearing on what we're going to do today. And I think those are some of the important things that we brought in that really helped put together that group of young players into a winning environment.
So, the 5-year timetable is also kind of interesting, right? Because like if you think about the 2011 draft that you had with the Red Sox, it was really in like 2015 that like late 2015 that those guys started showing a great deal of promise. 2016, they ended up kind of in the first when your last season in Boston, probably all credit to you. They ended up starting their kind of open window of championship contention that resulted in that championship by 2018. 2019, you have that group that you identified as as the basis of a core. 2023, only 4 years, they end up kind of taking that next step with a lot of the guys who they're surrounded by. Is that a reasonable timetable? Like when you think of kind of core formation, like can it go from can it be constructed in 4 or 5 years to open a championship window? Like is that reliable?
I think it's sooner than that now, honestly. I do. I think we went to the World Series last year in 23. Some of our guys were in the 2021 draft. I think, I think some guys are getting to the big leagues quicker now. Younger players are playing all the time. I feel like 5 years was kind of what it was like when we would go level to level to level. When I first started as a farm director, it's kind of what you did. A guy went level to level to level. You basically played at 4 levels for 4 years, unless you were, like PD or one of those guys that just kind of blew through the system. Ellsbury blew through the system. I think, but by and large, guys just went, and I don't think that's happening as much anymore, especially pitchers. Pitchers are going through pretty quickly, getting to the big leagues with their stuff and being able to pitch. So I think it's probably a rough framework, but I think guys are getting there quicker. I think how you supplement that at the major league, of the decisions we're making with trades or with outside free agent signings, that's what ties it all together. If you don't do a good job at that, it's not going to work. If you do a good job at that, I think it can all come together. Because I think some of the veteran players feed off the youth and the energy through a 162 game season of the young guys too. I think that's where it all kind of comes together.
It's super interesting that you mentioned the trade component in terms of supplementing, right? Because again, 2019, right? I deal with round numbers very well, so please excuse my my basic line of thinking. But that was also the summer that you traded Jazz Chisholm for Zach Gallen, right? That was a decision that felt like it was made based on a strength that you had in the system to address a weakness. And that's not the only time that you've done that you've traded, these haven't been necessarily traditional short-term for long-term trades, right? Like you got to the Diamondbacks, you immediately traded Mitch Haniger and Gene Segura to the Mariners for Marte and for Taijuan Walker. You also had the Dalton Varsho trade for Gurriel as well as Gabriel Moreno. That to me is particularly interesting in the context of the Red Sox, right? The Red Sox have this clear area of strength in terms of where their prospects are. They have a bunch of left-handed up the middle players who look like they have a chance to be pretty good, and they only have so many spots in the big league level where they can play them. How important is it to use surplus areas in a strong farm system and to be kind of either creative or aggressive in terms of addressing long-term areas of weakness for an organization?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I think some of it, the financial dynamics around payroll and ability to maneuver in the free agent market dictates a lot of, I think, somewhat how you have to operate. I think what you have access to, in terms of starting pitchers. So getting Zach Gallen, we didn't feel like we had a lot of long-term starting pitching at the time, and there's not a lot of great ways to get it. And to be fair, in starting pitching, I don't care where you are really in it's the most expensive commodity. Starting pitching in general, those finding young starting pitchers is really difficult in this league because the hitters now, anyone 1 through 9 can take you out of the ballpark. So I think pitching is becoming that much more difficult, especially starters, guys that you want to be able to haul innings, to go through lineups 3 times. Like that's just still something that we struggled with to really figure out where we can go get that. In the draft, it's tough. They come from all over the place. The more of the best hitters are aggregated at the very top of the draft, whereas the pitching, if you go look at where all the starting pitching in baseball come from, it's all over. It's all over the draft. And so I think the challenge there is just taking, with the Moreno trade, like we didn't have a catcher, and we were struggling to figure out ways to kind of have a long-term catcher here. We'd been here for 7 years, and we'd struggled to kind of figure out where that position we were going to fill it. So we took some risks. Not every one of these risks has worked out. The ones you've highlighted have. Thank you. We have also taken some other risks that have not, and I appreciate you not bringing those up. But
that'll be a separate podcast.
The Mike Hazen failings.
That's on Baseball is Important. Yeah.
Right. Oh wow, that would run a little longer than this one will. This episode will, unfortunately. I think we're in a position where we are as an organization that we can't just sit still, that we got to take risks, and we try to take calculated risks, but you still have to take risks. And I think some of those risks are trading good players.